Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard here to the Sports Talk Nation. Michael Cohen here with you. I thought that this would be a very interesting topic because after the Trevor Bauer signing with the Los Angeles Dodgers, a lot of Met fans were upset. A lot of Met fans have gone on rants. Many of them have gone on rants proclaiming that this offseason, an offseason where the Mets went out there and got Francisco Lindor, in an offseason where the Mets improved catcher, in an offseason where the Mets have made a lot of different moves, a lot of fans went out of the way to proclaim that this offseason was a quote-unquote failure, and a lot of people in the New York media have gone out there their way to call the Mets offseason a failure. So let's talk about this. Let's have this debate. Was this offseason overall a success or a failure? A lot to get into with this with regards to the New York Mets, so let's go right at it. Now, when you look at this offseason, it's hard to not consider this a success. Granted, I know a lot of Met fans would have liked to see the team go out there and spend more money. Obviously, nobody anticipated to have the PR nightmares that came and hovered over the Mets over the last several weeks. That being said, there were enough moves made by the Mets to improve the roster. We'll get to the PR stuff in a moment, but regarding the baseball moves, a lot of sound moves. The first big move of the offseason, the first big domino, obviously, was Steve Cohen purchasing this baseball team. And he did infuse, at the time of his purchase and at the time of his press conference in November, a lot of optimism among Met fans. Talk about winning the World Series within 3 to 5 years. Talk about being a team that would be a big market team compared to years past under the Wilpons, where the Mets were, in a lot of ways, pinching pennies. So there was an infusion of optimism from ownership that we had not seen in a very, very long time, and for a lot of Met fans, ever for that matter. So you had that. That was then followed very quickly by the signing of James McCann, free agent catcher at the time from the Chicago White Sox. $40 million for only 4 years. And when you look at it, when you think about it, a good bargain for a catcher too, because there was a lot of people who were thinking at the time Mets should be in on JT Realmuto, who is obviously a slightly better offensive catcher, power number-wise, compared to McCann. But the stories came out early in the offseason that Realmuto was not keen on playing in New York, decided to return to Philadelphia, and oh, by the way, now is injured, Realmuto, and is now out for a month for the Phillies. So, remember, Philadelphia spent $150 million for him. Mets spent only $40 million for McCann, who was highly regarded as a defensive catcher and has certainly gotten better over the last couple of years offensively in his time with the White Sox. So they get him. Then, of course, the big move, the one that really has changed the dynamic of this offseason and really got expectations ratcheted up even further, was the acquisition of Francisco Lindor. And it's hard not to sit here and say that this Mets offseason was a success just based on this kind of move. You get him as well as Carlos Carrasco, a starting pitcher that the Mets can now throw into the middle of this rotation for virtually very little. Mets didn't have to go deep into their farm system to give up prospects. They gave up Ahmed Rosario and Andres Gimenez. Now, I know those are two okay players. A lot of people like Gimenez's upside, but they trade those two guys for the best shortstop, arguably the best shortstop in baseball. And you're talking about a hitter in Lindor, who before last year's wonky year of 2020 had gone 3 straight years of 30-plus home runs or more. A hitter who was hitting around 285, who hits around 285 anyway, but in those 3 years was hitting around 277, 285, was hitting in that range in all those years, is an all-star, and is also a gold glover at shortstop. He is a 5-tool guy, and he is perfect fit for this team. Like I said, a culture-changing kind of move for the Mets. Now, we'll get into his contract situation just a little bit because that also plays a role into what went down this offseason. But just from the standpoint of changing things on the field, that was a huge move and a huge success for the Mets. And really, throughout this offseason, the Mets made a lot of shrewd moves. They were small moves. You know, unfortunately, it wasn't the George Springer kind of move that I think a lot of Met fans were hoping for, including myself. But they made a lot of interesting moves. Obviously, going back on Springer, I would say probably the biggest loss of the offseason was losing out on Springer to the Toronto Blue Jays. 6 years, $150 million. Should the Mets have gone a little bit more into the pot on him? probably should have. They probably should have gone a little more and offered up a little more to get him, because if the Mets had gotten George Springer, you're getting a player who hits for average, and not only hits for average in power and drives in runs and gets on base, but you get a good defensive center fielder, and you solve what is still a quagmire for the Mets right now is their outfield, because right now the Mets are looking at a situation with no DH in the National League this year. They're looking at a situation with Dom Smith, who is mostly a first baseman or designated hitter in left field. The Mets want to keep his live bat in the lineup in left. And Brandon Nimmo, who is a okay hitter, good hitter, not a great defensive center fielder in center field. So it's really now a situation where the Mets are going to be trying to move a lot of pieces in the outfield, and that's not obviously an ideal situation. They tried to fix that a little bit by going out there, improving their depth, getting Albert Almora Jr. as well as Kevin Pillar. And both of those guys are solid players, no doubt about it. They're certainly not of the ilk of a George Springer, but you get a guy like Pillar who, at age 32, still is a pretty good hitter. May have lost a step or two, if you listen to a lot of the analysts have been saying, defensively, but he is more of a bench guy and will be coming up in spots. Maybe more of a platoon guy with Nimmo. Now, you take a look at the other parts of this team and the other things that went down this offseason. I know a lot of fans, as I mentioned at the top, were upset that the Mets did not get Trevor Bauer. I'm not one of them. You know, a guy had a career 4 ERA. Yes, he had a great year last year, was a Cy Young Award winner. But that was against a very soft schedule and a very short season of only 60 games. And only made 12 starts. Telling me that he would have pitched to that 1.73 ERA for the next 20 starts if it was a full season, I don't think that would have happened. But be it that as it may, he took the Mets to the cleaners in a lot of ways, forced them to pony up nearly $40 million a year, and then rejected it and went to the Dodgers for a little bit less, even though he's going to have an option year for $45 million guaranteed next year for Trevor Bauer in Los Angeles. So he gets what he wants, and the Mets ended up not getting that kind of pitcher. In a lot of ways, as I said at the time, the Mets can go ahead and spend that money elsewhere in other spots. That was the good part about it. Going out there and getting Taijuan Walker, personally, I would have preferred to go out and get a guy like Jake Odorizzi just based on resume, a little more success with Tampa Bay and Minnesota. And Walker, throughout his career, has been kind of that more of a 4 or 5 starting pitcher, but that's really what the Mets are looking for here. 2 years guarantee, $20 million. They just signed him the other day. And last year, split time with the Seattle Mariners and the Toronto Blue Jays, pitched well. Pitched well last year to a 2.70 ERA and probably had his best season in quite some time, granted in a short sample size. But before that, he hadn't pitched in over 2 years. Hadn't pitched since 2017 in a full season. So we'll see what the Mets are going to get out of Walker. Again, he's more of a 4 or 5 starter, but he slots right there in the back end of this rotation, which is a good rotation. You got DeGrom, Jacob DeGrom, probably one of the best pitchers, if not the best pitcher in all of Major League Baseball. You got Carlos Carrasco, who was a very good starter in Cleveland all those years as a 2 or 3 starter. Marcus Stroman was once an ace in the Blue Jays, now back for a full year. Will pitch this year, unlike last year he decided to opt out because of the COVID protocols. And then you have David Peterson, who impressed you at times last year, and then eventually Noah Syndergaard comes back. So it's actually a very good rotation if everything should work out the way the Mets are hoping. Now, one avenue that I think is very much lacking would be the bullpen. I know they had a chance at Trevor Rosenthal. He decided to go instead to the Oakland A's for $11 million in 1 year. A lot for a reliever, but overall, you do have Aaron Loup back in there now. You do have Trevor May that the Mets added from the Minnesota Twins. So they've added some pieces to the bullpen. We'll see how it works out. It does make me nervous, but I do think that is the one weakness that the Mets have had and have right now going into the 2021 regular season. So as far as on the field is concerned, the Mets made some shrewd moves. They made some additions that are going to help this team over the next year, maybe the next couple of years. And they also did it mindful of the fact that the sport itself is still kind of in a transition as well financially. I know that a lot of people wanted to see the Mets spend a lot of money. I know the Mets people want to see Steve Cohen throw money around all over the place. He himself said he was not going to spend like a drunken sailor, didn't do that. But yeah, you have uncertainty as far as what baseball revenue is for 2021. Moving forward, also the issues over the labor unrest pending for 2022. You can see why there wasn't a lot of big spending. It's not just the Mets. There were a lot of teams, except for the San Diego Padres, who decided to go nuts. And let's let it lead into that here, because this goes into the Francisco Lindor contract. Lindor is going to want to get paid big money. And I think one reason why the Mets didn't go out there and go gangbusters in spending a lot of money is because they really like Lindor. And they probably want to find a way, any way, to try to keep him. Yes, I know the shortstop market next year is going to be big, but they want to keep Lindor. He's probably the best shortstop out there. He's going to look for a big contract, considering the fact that Mookie Betts got over $300 million from the Dodgers last year, and the fact that just the other day that Fernando Tatis Jr., after not even a full season, gets a big $340 million contract over 14 years. From the San Diego Padres, who went nuts this offseason, spending all kinds of money, making all kinds of deals this year in the offseason. That's going to change the market, and it could have an effect on what Lindor could be expecting, maybe upwards of $350 or more for that matter, considering how valuable he has been as a player who is still very much in the prime of his career. So that's something to watch as well. Also, the Mets with Michael Conforto, they want to find a way to keep him. Those are the two big pieces, Conforto and Lindor, that the Mets want to keep long-term. And that is something that a lot of Met fans have to be mindful of, for that matter, as far as the spending by this team. Also, keep in mind you have DeGrom, who's probably at some point going to want a renegotiation on some of his contract, especially being the best pitcher in all of baseball. May want a little more, so you never know. He may want to get a little more money, a little more dough as well at some point down the road. So, and the reason why I think that this offseason, especially over the last few weeks, kind of tailspinned a little bit, is because of the PR stuff that went on with the Mets. Starting with Jared Porter and all the sexual assault allegations that came out about him with regards to the foreign female reporter when he was with the Cubs, and the fact that the Mets did not hear from anybody who had any kind of bad thing to say about Jared Porter before the Mets hired him. Then the story comes out 37 days after he had been hired. The fact that Mickey Callaway, former Met manager, had sent lewd text messages and photos to female reporters as well, including his time as Mets manager. And then the story just this week that minor league hitting instructor Ryan Ellis was also fired a couple weeks ago with Porter after it was discovered that he, too, has sexually harassed 3 female employees within the Mets. So the Mets have a lot of PR problems. A lot of these problems, especially the Mickey Callaway and Ryan Ellis, predate Cohen in a lot of ways. They go back to the Wilpon fiasco. But they also are on Sandy Alderson's watch because a lot of these people were brought in by Sandy Alderson, and that's a bad look for him. So the Mets have a lot of work to do as far as public relations is concerned and trying to clean up their image. And I think that is part of this off season right now for the Mets, and even this new season 2021 is the Mets not only are really trying to transition from being this kind of, same old Mets kind of laughingstock kind of team to being a serious player here, not just for players, but also being taken seriously as another organization. So that's why, and I look at this offseason, I give it, if I had to grade it, I would say probably a B-. B- because, the minus being because the PR problems they have here are very glaring and are very disconcerting. But I give it a B because, well, they made a lot of moves. They made some shrewd moves. They made some moves to improve this team. It's a better team than it was just a year ago. And it's a very interesting team that they have on paper that's going to take the field this year. It's not a complete team. I think this is a team that's a work in progress. I think they got a lot more moves they still have to make. Bullpens, outfield, starting rotation, they could always use another arm. You're asking me right now, I think that at the very least they could be a wild card contending team. So, again, B- from this offseason for the Mets. Some improvement, but a lot of work to do as well. So, folks, leave your thoughts below. What do you think about this Mets offseason? How would you grade it? What are some of the things that you take away that are both positive, negative? Leave your thoughts below. Again, I know this has been a debate by Met fans over the last couple of weeks now. So let's talk about it. And yes, for you Yankee fans, we're going to do the same thing for you guys, whether this offseason was a success or failure for the Bronx Bombers as well. So Remember, folks, like and subscribe right here to the Sports Talk Nation on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Open Mic Program. And remember, follow us on Twitter as well, @Open Mic NJ. We'll talk to you next time.